Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Answers. Tonight, we're drifting into one of humanity's most fascinating mysteries. One that sits quietly in your pocket, hides in your bank account, and shapes nearly every interaction in the modern world. We're exploring the story of money. Not just what it is, but why we created it. How it evolved from nothing into the invisible force that connects billions of strangers across continents and centuries. Money is such a fundamental part of our lives that we rarely pause to consider how strange it truly is. These pieces of paper, these metal discs, these digital numbers on a screen that we trust so completely, they're really just agreements. Collective dreams we've all decided to believe in together. And yet, for something so abstract, money moves mountains, builds cities, feeds nations, and records the ambitions and struggles of everyone who has ever lived in a complex society. As you settle in tonight, imagine a world without money. Picture yourself trying to survive, to thrive, to build something meaningful when every exchange requires finding someone who has exactly what you need and needs exactly what you have. It sounds exhausting, doesn't it? And that exhaustion, that friction, is precisely why our ancestors sought a better way. If you enjoy these quiet journeys through history and human ingenuity, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps others find their way here too, one curious mind at a time. But for now, all you need to do is rest. Let your eyes relax. Allow your body to soften. Let your mind drift gently as we travel back through millennia to understand how humans transformed the way we exchange value, created trust between strangers, and built the economic foundations of civilization itself. The story of money is really the story of human cooperation on a scale so vast it staggers the imagination. It's a story of practical problems and creative solutions, of trust and betrayal, of empires rising and falling based on tiny metal discs stamped with the faces of long-dead kings. Let's begin our journey in a time before coins, before currency, before anyone had even conceived of the idea that value itself could be captured in a portable, standardized form. Before money, understanding early human exchange. In the beginning, there was no money. This seems obvious, but it's worth sitting with for a moment. For the vast majority of human existence, our ancestors lived in small bands of hunter-gatherers who shared food, tools, and shelter without any formal system of exchange. When an anthropologist travels to isolated communities that have had limited contact with monetary economies, they discover something surprising. These societies don't function through barter, as economics textbooks so often claim. Instead, they operate through something far more elegant and far more human, what anthropologists call gift economies. In a gift economy, resources flow through networks of social obligation rather than immediate exchange. Imagine a small tribal community where everyone knows everyone else, where your reputation matters more than any possession you might own. In such a world, when you catch more fish than your family can eat, you don't wait to find someone with excess grain who wants fish. You simply share your abundance with those who need it. The butcher gives meat to the baker without expecting immediate payment. The farmer offers vegetables to the toolmaker without calculating precise equivalences. These gifts create bonds, obligations, and expectations that weave the community together. This isn't charity. It's a sophisticated system of reciprocal exchange stretched across time and social relationships. When you give freely today, you create a web of obligation that ensures others will give freely to you when your circumstances change. The person who hoards resources in a gift economy becomes an outcast, while the generous person builds social capital that proves more valuable than any material wealth. Archaeological evidence and anthropological studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies reveal that this system worked remarkably well for small, stable communities where everyone's reputation was known and social pressure could enforce reciprocity. But gift economies had a crucial limitation built into their very nature. They required trust, familiarity, and ongoing relationships. They worked beautifully within communities but broke down almost completely between strangers or rival groups. When Phoenician traders encountered distant peoples, they couldn't rely on the gift economy that worked so well in their home villages. They needed something else, some way to exchange goods with people they might never see again, people whose language they might not speak, people whose reputation they couldn't verify through shared community connections. This is where the popular myth of widespread barter economies comes in, and this is where we need to pause and correct a misconception that appears in nearly every economics textbook. The idea that ancient peoples commonly engaged in direct barter, trading 3 chickens for a bronze knife or 5 baskets of grain for a woven blanket, turns out to be largely fictional. Anthropologist David Graeber spent years researching this question and found something astonishing. There's virtually no historical or archaeological evidence of any society that used barter as its primary mode of exchange. As anthropologist Caroline Humphrey noted in her research, no example of a pure barter economy has ever been described, let alone documented as emerging before monetary systems. So, if gift economies dominated small communities and barter wasn't actually common, what filled the gap? The answer is credit and debt systems. Long before anyone invented coins or currency, ancient peoples developed sophisticated systems of accounting, of tracking who owed what to whom. In ancient Mesopotamia, 5,000 years ago, temple bureaucrats kept careful records on clay tablets, documenting complex webs of obligation. A farmer might receive grain from the temple stores and owe labor during planting season. A craftsman might be given copper and owe finished tools by the harvest. These weren't instantaneous exchanges. They were relationships of obligation that stretched across seasons and years. The temples and palaces of ancient civilizations functioned as economic centers that collected resources, stored them, and redistributed them according to complex rules. These so-called temple economies or palace economies represented an early form of centralized economic management. Workers are provided labor not for immediate payment, but in exchange for rations, housing, and future security. It was a system based on trust in institutions rather than trust in individuals. The temple priests who managed these systems became some of history's first accountants, developing writing itself partly to keep track of these elaborate economic relationships. In ancient Egypt, Workers who built the pyramids weren't slaves laboring under the whip, as popular imagination suggests. Recent archaeological evidence shows they were paid workers who received rations of bread and beer, housing, and medical care. They participated in what historians call a corvée system, where labor itself served as a form of tax payment. The state provided for their needs, and they provided the labor that built monuments that would endure for millennia. This wasn't money as we know it, but it was a functioning economic system that allowed massive cooperative projects without anyone exchanging coins or currency. These early systems worked, but they had obvious limitations. They required centralized authority, detailed record-keeping, and relatively stable settled populations. They couldn't easily facilitate trade between distant regions or between people who didn't share the same institutional framework. As human societies grew more complex, as trade networks expanded, as specialization increased and craftsmen began producing goods for distant markets they would never see, these older systems strained under the weight of increasing complexity. Something new was needed. Some innovation that could capture value in portable form, that strangers could trust, that could travel across borders and cultures, that could be divided and combined without requiring complex calculations or institutional guarantees. The stage was set for one of humanity's most consequential inventions, the problems that needed solving. To understand why money emerged, we need to understand the specific problems that our ancestors faced as their societies grew in size and complexity. The challenges of economic exchange in ancient civilizations were not abstract theoretical puzzles. They were practical difficulties that made daily life harder, that limited prosperity, and that prevented human cooperation from reaching its full potential. The first and most obvious problem was what economists call the double coincidence of wants. Imagine you're a skilled maker of clay pots living in a town along an ancient trade route. You've produced more pots than your family needs, and you'd like to exchange some for grain to feed your family, leather to make new shoes, and perhaps some copper tools to improve your workshop. In a direct exchange system, you need to find someone who not only has grain, leather, and copper tools, but who also wants clay pots right now in the exact quantities you have to offer. The grain farmer might not need pots at all. The leather worker might want pots but have no grain to give. The coppersmith might want grain, but not have enough for a fair trade with you. The combinations become impossibly tangled. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a fundamental barrier to specialization and trade. If you couldn't reliably exchange your products for the things you needed, you had to remain more self-sufficient, producing more of your own food, making more of your own tools, never developing the deep skills that come from focusing on one craft exclusively. The double coincidence problem kept economies small and relatively simple, limiting human prosperity and technological advancement. The second problem was divisibility and value comparison. How do you split a living cow to buy a small amount of grain? How do you compare the value of a day's labor harvesting wheat to a well-made bronze knife? Without standardized measures, every exchange required negotiation and judgment. Was a sheep worth 20 loaves of bread or 30? Did the quality of the wool matter? What about the size of the sheep? What about the season, when bread might be scarce or plentiful? These calculations exhausted energy and time that could have been spent on productive work. The third problem was storage of value across time. Grain rots, vegetables spoil, meat goes bad. Cloth can be damaged by moisture and pests. If you wanted to store the value of your labor for the future, to save for hard times or to accumulate wealth for a large purchase, perishable goods made poor vessels for preserved value. You could trade your surplus for durable goods, but those goods took up physical space and couldn't be easily divided when you needed just a portion of your stored wealth. The fourth problem, perhaps more subtle but equally important, was trust between strangers. As trade routes expanded and merchants began traveling longer distances, they encountered people from different cultures who spoke different languages and worshipped different gods. How could a Greek merchant trust the weight and purity of silver offered by a Phoenician trader? How could either party be certain they weren't being cheated? Every exchange required careful testing, weighing, and verification, consuming time and introducing opportunities for disagreement and conflict. Ancient peoples tried various solutions to these problems, each representing a step toward what we would eventually recognize as money. Commodity money emerged as an early innovation, using goods that were valuable in themselves, but also portable and relatively durable. Cattle served this purpose in many societies. The Latin word for money, pecunia, derives from pecus, meaning cattle. Livestock had obvious value. Everyone needed food and hides and labor, but they also had obvious drawbacks. Cows can't be split into smaller units without destroying their value. They require feeding and care. They can die or become sick. They're difficult to transport over long distances. Grain became another form of commodity money, especially in agricultural civilizations. Barley and wheat were essential for survival, could be stored for reasonable periods, and could be measured in quantities large or small. The great granaries of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia served as repositories of wealth, and payments were often calculated in measures of grain. But grain, too, had limitations. It was bulky and heavy to transport. Rodents and insects could destroy it. Moisture could ruin it. Its value fluctuated dramatically with harvests and seasons. Precious metals began to emerge as a more sophisticated form of commodity money. Gold, silver, and copper had several advantages that made them superior to cattle or grain. They didn't spoil or die. They could be melted down and recast without losing value. They could be precisely weighed. They were beautiful and rare, valued across cultures for ornament and ritual purposes. Their scarcity meant that small amounts had significant value, making them portable enough to carry substantial wealth. But metals as currency presented their own challenges. Every time someone offered gold or silver in trade, the other party had to verify its weight and purity. Was this really pure gold or an alloy mixed with cheaper metals? Did this piece actually weigh what the seller claimed? Merchants carried scales, weights, and testing materials, turning every transaction into a small chemistry and mathematics project. Skilled cheaters learned to hollow out gold pieces and fill them with cheaper metals, or to mix silver with lead in proportions difficult to detect by eye. Trust remained elusive. What was needed was something that combined the value and portability of precious metals with some guarantee of authenticity that didn't require every merchant to be an expert assayer and metallurgist. The solution, when it finally emerged, was so simple and so revolutionary that it would transform human civilization. Someone needed to stamp a piece of metal with an official mark that said, in effect, "This piece of gold has been verified by an authority you can trust. Its weight is standard. Its purity is guaranteed. Accept it with confidence." That innovation would happen in a small kingdom on the western edge of what is now Turkey, a prosperous land where gold-bearing rivers flowed down from mountains, where east met west along busy trade routes, where merchants from distant lands gathered to exchange the products of continents. The stage was set for the invention of the coin, the birth of standardized value. The rivers of ancient Lydia carried something precious. As water rushed down from the mountains of Anatolia, it transported tiny particles of electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, deposited in the sandy beds where prospectors could pan for treasure. This natural wealth made Lydia prosperous, but it also created a problem. Electrum's composition varied dramatically. Some pieces might be 73% gold and 27% silver, while others reversed those proportions. Each piece required a testing to determine its true value, making trade cumbersome and dispute-prone. Lydia flourished during the 7th and 6th centuries before the Common Era, positioned perfectly at the crossroads of civilizations. To the west lay the Greek city-states and islands of Ionia, buzzing with philosophical innovation and maritime trade. To the east stretched the vast territories controlled by powerful empires. Through Lydia flowed goods from Europe, Asia, and Africa, carried by merchants who spoke dozens of languages and worshipped hundreds of gods. The Lydian capital of Sardis became wealthy from this trade, its markets filled with ivory from Africa, amber from the Baltic, spices from the distant east, and wine from Greek vineyards. The Lydians were renowned craftsmen, especially skilled in metallurgy and jewelry making. Their society valued merchants highly, granting them a special status and calling them agoraios, the people of the market. This respect for commerce and trade created a culture receptive to economic innovation. When problems arose in their trading systems, Lydian craftsmen and merchants were motivated to find solutions. Around 630 BCE, give or take a few decades, the dates remain debated among scholars. Someone in Lydia had a revolutionary idea. What if, instead of using rough pieces of electrum that needed constant verification, they created standardized pieces stamped with an official mark? The innovation seems almost obvious in hindsight, but it represented a conceptual leap that would reshape human civilization. The earliest Lydian coins were irregular lumps of electrum, far removed from the precise circular discs we think of today. But they had something previous commodity money lacked: an official stamp pressed into the metal with a hardened die. Some bore simple designs: a lion's head, a stag, abstract geometric patterns. Others carried inscriptions in the Lydian or Greek alphabets. One famous early coin proclaimed, "I am the badge of Fanes," or simply of Fanes, announcing the authority who guaranteed its value. These stamps served multiple functions simultaneously. They indicated that the coin had been examined and verified by an authority, saving merchants the trouble of testing every piece. They guaranteed a standard weight and purity, removing the need for scales and weights in every transaction. They created a recognizable brand that could be trusted across distances and cultures, and they represented an exercise of state power, a declaration that the Lydian kings controlled not just territory and people, but value itself. The earliest coins were struck in various denominations, allowing for transactions both large and small. The largest, called staters, would have been worth substantial amounts, enough to purchase a sheep or support a family for days or weeks. But Lydian mints also produced tiny fractions, down to 1/96th of a stater, small enough for everyday purchases of bread or vegetables. This range of denominations made the system flexible and practical for different kinds of exchange. Archaeological evidence for these early coins comes primarily from excavations at the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world in later centuries. In the foundation deposits of this temple, archaeologists discovered a cache of electrum coins, including pieces from Lydia and neighboring Greek city-states. This discovery helps date the emergence of coinage to approximately 630 to 600 BCE, though scholars continue to debate the precise chronology. The person or persons who first struck these coins likely had no idea of the revolution they were initiating. Perhaps they saw it simply as a practical solution to the problem of verifying electrum purity. Maybe they recognized it as a way to expedite trade and increase Lydia's commercial importance. They might have understood it as a tool of state power, a way for the king to mark his authority on the instruments of commerce. Whatever their motivations, they had created something unprecedented. A portable, durable, divisible, standardized, and trusted medium of exchange. King Alyattes, who ruled Lydia from approximately 610 to 560 BCE, is often credited with being the first monarch to issue coins systematically. His reign saw the expansion of coinage from a local curiosity to a widespread institution. The coins of his era bore the royal symbol of Lydia, a lion, marking them as official state currency. This was another crucial innovation. The idea that currency should be a monopoly of the state, issued and controlled by royal authority rather than private merchants or craftsmen. But it was Alyattes' son, Croesus, who would perfect the Lydian monetary system and whose name would become forever linked with wealth itself. Croesus ruled from approximately 560 to 546 BCE, and during his reign, Lydia reached its peak of prosperity and power. He made a crucial innovation that completed the transformation of coins from convenient tokens to true currency. He moved away from electrum to pure gold and silver coins. The problem with electrum was its variable composition. Even with an official stamp, people remained uncertain about how much gold versus silver each coin contained. Croesus' solution was elegant. Mint separate series of pure gold coins and pure silver coins, each with precisely controlled weight and purity. The gold crow seeds, as they came to be known, and their silver counterparts removed all ambiguity. A gold coin was gold, testable by any standard method. A silver coin was silver, its value clear and certain. These coins of Croesus spread throughout the ancient world, becoming an early form of international trade currency. They've been found in hoards far from Lydia, discovered in Greek temple treasuries, unearthed in the ruins of distant trading posts. Their acceptance across diverse cultures demonstrates something profound about human nature. People are willing to trust a well-designed system of value, even when they don't personally know or necessarily respect the authority that created it. Greek merchants who might have despised the Lydian barbarians still accepted Croesides in payment, because the system itself was trustworthy. The Lydian monetary revolution didn't happen in isolation. Neighboring Greek city-states quickly recognized the advantages of coinage and began minting their own versions. Miletus produced coins with a lion design. Phocea stamped seals onto their electrum. Ephesus, with its famous temple, created coins bearing a bee, symbol of the goddess Artemis. Each city developed its own iconography and standards, but all followed the basic Lydian innovation. Standardized weights, guaranteed purity, official stamps. What made Lydian coinage revolutionary wasn't just the coins themselves. It was the web of concepts and institutions that supported them. Coinage required a government powerful enough to monopolize production and punish counterfeiters. It demanded metallurgical knowledge to produce consistent alloys and test purity. It needed die makers who could carve detailed images into hardened metal. It required social trust in institutions beyond immediate personal relationships. It created new professions. Money changers who could convert between different coinages, bankers who could store wealth safely, and financial advisors who understood the complexities of various currency systems. The city of Sardis, excavated by archaeologists in modern times, has revealed evidence of the infrastructure behind ancient coinage. Furnaces for melting and alloying metals, workshops with anvils and dies, test weights and touchstones for verifying purity. The physical remains of what was, in essence, the world's first systematic minting operation. Walking through the ruins of ancient Sardis today, you can almost feel the transformation happening, the moment when humans took an abstract concept, the idea of standardized value, and made it solid and real and trustworthy. The Lydian invention of coinage came at a cost we should acknowledge. Archaeological evidence suggests that the early electrum coins were deliberately debased, their gold content diluted with extra silver to stretch the royal treasury further. Laboratory analysis of these coins shows they contained roughly 54% gold when they were officially valued, as if they were 73% gold. This debasement allowed the Lydian state to profit handsomely from each coin minted, a practice that would be repeated by nearly every state that issued currency throughout history. The temptation to inflate the money supply for short-term gain apparently began at the very moment coins were invented. But despite this early debasement, despite the inevitable tensions between state power and economic fairness, the innovation of coinage stuck. It solved too many problems too elegantly to be abandoned. Within a century of its invention in Lydia, coins would spread to Persia, to mainland Greece, eventually to Rome, India, and China. The basic concept, a standardized piece of precious metal bearing an official stamp to guarantee its value, would persist for more than 2,000 years, evolving and adapting, but retaining its essential character. When the Persian Empire conquered Lydia in 546 BCE, King Cyrus the Great found himself ruling a territory that used a monetary system completely foreign to Persian traditions. The Persians had relied on barter and weighed silver, but Cyrus, practical ruler that he was, recognized the value of the Lydian innovation. He adopted coinage for his empire, particularly in regions where he stationed Greek mercenaries who demanded payment in coin. The system spread not through force, but through utility, because people recognized it worked better than the alternatives. How? Coins changed everything. The invention of coinage triggered transformations that rippled through every aspect of ancient society. It wasn't simply a technological improvement, like a better plow or a stronger bronze alloy. It was a conceptual revolution that changed how humans thought about value, exchange, trust, and social relationships. To understand why coins mattered so profoundly, we need to explore the specific ways they reshaped civilization. The most immediate and obvious change was the acceleration of trade. Before coins, every transaction required negotiation, testing, and judgment. How many chickens equal a bronze sword? How much wheat is a woven blanket worth? These questions had no universal answers. Value depended on circumstances, on how badly each party wanted what the other offered, on the skill of negotiators, on local conditions and seasons. Coins replaced this chaotic flexibility with cold, clear numbers. A sword cost this many drachmas. A blanket was worth that amount. Suddenly, prices could be quoted, compared, and understood across distances. This standardization enabled merchants to plan in ways they never could before. If you knew a bushel of grain sold for a certain number of coins in your home city and for a different number in a distant market, you could calculate whether it was worth transporting grain that distance. You could compare multiple possible trades and choose the most profitable. You could save coins from several small transactions to make one large purchase later. The mental burden of economic calculation dropped dramatically, freeing cognitive resources for other kinds of innovation. Coins also democratized commerce in profound ways. Before standardized currency, large-scale trade required either personal relationships spanning years or access to temple and palace bureaucracies that could track complex debts and obligations. Coins let anyone, even a stranger in a foreign city, participate in markets. A farmer with surplus vegetables could sell to anyone with coins. A craftsman could advertise his wares with a simple price rather than hoping to find someone with exactly the right goods to trade. Economic opportunity spread beyond aristocratic networks and institutional connections to reach anyone with something to sell and coins to spend. The psychological impact of coins went deeper than mere convenience. Coins were tangible, countable, and storable in a way that wealth had never been before. You could quite literally count your fortune, stacking gold and silver pieces to see your prosperity grow. This tangibility made wealth feel more real and permanent. It encouraged saving and accumulation in new ways. Where perishable goods discouraged hoarding, coins made it rational to set aside surplus for future needs. This change in saving behavior likely contributed to the accumulation of capital that would eventually fund larger economic projects, from merchant ships to irrigation systems. Coins also transformed taxation and government finance. Before coinage, states collected taxes in kind: grain from farmers, labor from subjects, products from craftsmen. These payments were bulky, perishable, and difficult to transport and store. Coins allowed governments to demand taxes in standardized currency, which could be easily transported, stored indefinitely, and spent flexibly on whatever the state needed, whether that was soldiers' pay, construction materials, or administrative expenses. This flexibility made states more powerful and more capable of long-term planning and large-scale projects. The military implications were equally significant. Armies had traditionally been composed of citizens who could afford their own equipment, or professional soldiers bound to aristocratic patrons through personal loyalty. Coins enabled the hiring of mercenaries paid strictly with currency, creating professional military forces with no particular loyalty beyond their pay. The Persian Empire's adoption of coinage followed directly from its need to pay Greek mercenaries who had no interest in Persian land grants or aristocratic obligations, but very much wanted portable wealth they could spend anywhere. Coinage created entirely new professions and industries. Money changers appeared in marketplaces to help travelers convert between different cities' coinages. These money changers needed detailed knowledge of relative values, exchange rates, and the reliability of various mints. They were the ancestors of modern foreign exchange traders, performing essentially the same function 26 centuries ago. Bankers emerged to store wealth safely and to lend coins at interest, creating the foundations of finance and credit that would eventually enable large-scale commercial enterprises. The social implications of coinage were complex and sometimes troubling. Money created new forms of inequality based purely on wealth accumulation, rather than traditional sources of status like nobility, military prowess, or religious authority. Someone with enough coins could live comfortably without producing anything of tangible value, simply by lending money at interest or trading to currencies. This development troubled ancient philosophers and moralists who saw it as a corruption of proper social relationships. Aristotle wrote extensively about the dangers of crematistics, the art of making money for its own sake, which he saw as unnatural and potentially destructive to the social fabric. Yet, coins also undermined some traditional hierarchies. A clever merchant of humble birth could accumulate wealth that rivaled or exceeded that of old aristocratic families. The Lydian respect for people of the market reflected this social fluidity, though it remained controversial in more traditional societies. The tension between old aristocratic values based on birth and land ownership and new commercial values based on money and trade would shape politics and culture for centuries. Coins facilitated long-distance trade networks on an unprecedented scale. A merchant could now load a ship with goods, sail to a distant port, sell his cargo for coins, and use those coins to purchase different goods to carry home. The coins themselves, small and durable, could travel far more easily than barter goods. This portability accelerated the formation of trading networks that spanned the Mediterranean world and beyond. Products from India appeared in Roman markets. Chinese silk traveled west along routes facilitated by coinages that could be exchanged at multiple points along the journey. The conceptual leap represented by coinage prepared human minds for even more abstract forms of value. Once people accepted that a lump of metal stamped with a lion's head represented a certain amount of exchangeable value, they had made a cognitive leap into the realm of abstract symbolic thinking about economics. This leap would eventually enable paper money, checks, and ultimately digital currency. None of these later developments would have been possible without the foundational trust built by coins. The demonstration that value could be represented by symbols backed by institutional authority. Coins also became vehicles for political messaging and propaganda. The images stamped on coins weren't chosen randomly. They represented the authority and values of the issuing state. Lydian lions symbolized royal power. Greek coins often bore images of gods and goddesses, linking political authority to divine favor. Later, Roman coins would feature emperors' portraits, distributing their images across the empire and reinforcing the personality cult that sustained autocratic rule. Every transaction became a small reminder of who held power and what symbols defined the state. The standardization of coinage inadvertently created an early form of market regulation. When a king guaranteed that every coin of a certain type would have the same weight and purity, he was establishing standards that traders could rely on. This government role in maintaining currency standards would become a fundamental expectation of state authority. Debasing the currency, reducing the precious metal content while maintaining the face value, became a form of hidden taxation that often triggered economic crises and political instability. The relationship between sound money and political legitimacy was established almost as soon as coins were invented. The spread of coinage across civilizations. The Lydian innovation didn't remain confined to Anatolia. Within decades of the first coins appearing in Sardis, the concept had spread to Greek city-states, where it took root and flourished with characteristic Hellenic elaboration. The Greeks didn't merely copy Lydian coins. They adapted the concept to fit their own diverse political structures and aesthetic sensibilities, creating hundreds of unique coinages that reflected the fractured political landscape of ancient Greece. Athens developed the iconic owl coins, silver tetradrachms bearing the goddess Athena on one side, and her sacred owl on the reverse. These coins became so trusted and widely accepted that they functioned as an international currency throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The silver came from the rich mines at Lorient, which helped fund Athens' golden age and its naval supremacy. The Athenian state's guarantee of weight and purity was so reliable that foreign merchants preferred Athenian owls to their own local coinages for major transactions. Each Greek city-state minted its own coins with distinctive designs. Corinth featured the winged horse Pegasus. Aegina chose a sea turtle. Syracuse depicted the nymph Arethusa surrounded by dolphins. These varied designs served both practical and symbolic purposes. Practically, they made coins easily identifiable, reducing confusion in markets where dozens of different currencies might circulate. Symbolically, they declared civic identity and pride, transforming every market transaction into a small assertion of political autonomy. The Greek city-states experimented with different denominations and standards. Some cities used the Athenian weight standard. Others followed Corinthian or Aeginetan systems. Money changers did brisk business in ports and marketplaces, calculating exchange rates and facilitating trade between regions with incompatible currencies. This proliferation of coinages reflected Greek political fragmentation, but also demonstrated the flexibility and adaptability of the concept. Coinage didn't require political unity. It worked just as well in a landscape of small, competitive city-states as it did in a unified kingdom like Lydia. The Persian Empire, after conquering Lydia, became another major force in spreading coinage. The Persian kings minted their own gold coins, called darics after King Darius, and silver sigloi. These coins featured the Persian king in archer's pose, a symbol of military power that circulated from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. The Persians were pragmatic about coinage, issuing it primarily in regions where it was economically useful rather than trying to impose it everywhere. In regions that hadn't developed monetized economies, the Persians continued using traditional forms of taxation and administration. To the east, coinage developed independently in ancient China, though the timeline and influences remain debated among scholars. Chinese coins took distinctive forms that reflected different aesthetic and practical priorities. Rather than round discs, early Chinese coins were shaped like miniature farming tools, spade money, and knife money cast in bronze. These forms reference the tools that originally served as commodity money in Chinese agricultural societies. The shapes were eventually standardized into round coins with square holes in the center, allowing them to be strung on cords for carrying. This design persisted in Chinese coinage for over 2,000 years, one of the longest-running currency designs in human history. The Chinese approach to coinage reflected some unique philosophical and political assumptions. Chinese coins were made from bronze rather than precious metals, emphasizing their role as tokens of value rather than valuable objects in themselves. This made Chinese currency more clearly fiat money, deriving value from state authority rather than intrinsic metal worth. It also meant Chinese coins had lower face values, making them more suitable for everyday purchases by common people rather than just large commercial transactions. The spread of coinage to Rome would eventually prove most consequential for European history. Rome didn't begin minting its own coins until relatively late, around the 3rd century BCE. Before that, Romans had used weighed bronze and crude cast bronze ingots. The Romans were practical people who observed the Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily, using coins to great effect, and decided to adopt the technology themselves. Roman coinage began with heavy bronze coins called the AES grave, cast rather than struck, and bearing simple designs. But Romans quickly mastered the technology and began minting silver denarii that would become the standard currency of the Mediterranean world. The denarius, derived from the Latin word for 10 because it initially equaled 10 bronze asses, remained the backbone of Roman currency for centuries. When the Bible mentions paying workers a denarius for a day's labor, it's referencing a coin with over 400 years of history. Roman coins became instruments of state propaganda on an unprecedented scale. Because the empire was so vast, coins became the primary way most citizens saw images of their emperor. The tradition began during the civil wars of the late Republic, when rival generals minted coins bearing their own portraits to build personal loyalty. The emperors continued this practice, using coins to distribute their image, announce military victories, claim divine favor, and communicate political messages to millions of subjects who might never see them in person. The Romans also innovated in currency debasement, usually for desperate fiscal reasons. The silver content of the denarius was gradually reduced over centuries, as the empire faced mounting military and administrative expenses. By the 3rd century CE, the denarius contained almost no silver at all, just a bronze core with a thin silver wash. This debasement contributed to inflation and economic instability that helped undermine the empire. The relationship between sound currency and political stability was demonstrated in reverse, as bad money contributed to the empire's decline. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire and eventually became its official religion, Christian symbols began appearing on coins. Constantine the Great minted coins with gyro symbols representing Christ. This marked another evolution in coin design, the incorporation of religious rather than purely political or cultural symbols. The tradition would continue through the Middle Ages, with most European coins bearing Christian symbols and phrases in Latin, invoking divine favor. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE disrupted but didn't destroy European coinage. Various successor kingdoms continued minting coins, though often with reduced quality and consistency. The Byzantine Empire in the East maintained a sophisticated coinage system based on gold solidi and copper foles. Islamic caliphates developed their own distinctive coinages, often bearing verses from the Quran and avoiding human or animal images out of religious scruple. In medieval Europe, coinage fragmented dramatically. Hundreds of feudal lords, bishops, and city-states claimed the right to mint coins, often producing currencies of dubious quality and uncertain value. This fragmentation reversed many of the benefits that standardized coinage had originally provided. Long-distance trade became more difficult as merchants had to navigate a bewildering landscape of local coinages with varying weights, purities, and acceptabilities. Money changers once again became essential intermediaries, and their fees took a cut of every transaction that crossed political boundaries. Yet even in this fragmented landscape, certain coinages gained wider acceptance through reputation and quality. The Venetian ducat, a gold coin minted with consistent weight and purity, became widely trusted throughout the Mediterranean. Florentine florins achieved similar status. These proto-international currencies demonstrated that good money could transcend political boundaries through sheer reliability and utility. Merchants preferred coins they could trust, regardless of which prince or republic had minted them. From metal to paper. The next evolution. The next major revolution in money came not from the Mediterranean world, but from China, where necessity mothered an invention that would eventually transform global finance. During the Tang Dynasty in the 7th century CE, Chinese merchants faced a peculiar problem. Their economy was growing rapidly, trade networks were expanding, and the bronze coins that served as currency were becoming inconvenient. Bronze was heavy. A merchant conducting a major transaction might need to transport thousands of coins, a physical burden requiring carts and guards. Chinese merchants developed a clever solution. They began depositing their bronze coins with trusted agents and receiving paper certificates in return. Certificates that promised the bearer could reclaim the coins on demand. These certificates were lighter, easier to transport, and less vulnerable to theft since they had no value to anyone who didn't understand the system. This wasn't yet true paper money, because the certificates could only be redeemed from the specific agent who had issued them. But it was a crucial step toward paper currency. The Chinese government, observing how useful these private certificates had become, decided to create an official version. During the Song dynasty in the 10th and 11th centuries CE, the state began issuing paper money backed by reserves of bronze coins. This official paper money, called jiaozi, could be used for tax payments and was accepted in government transactions. It represented a profound shift in thinking about money. For the first time, value was represented not by the medium itself, having intrinsic worth, but by government promise. These pieces of paper had essentially no material value, but people accepted them because the state guaranteed they could be exchanged for coins or used to fulfill obligations. The Chinese experiment with paper money faced a problem that would plague fiat currency for centuries: the temptation to print more money than reserves could support. Several times in Chinese history, dynasties printed excessive amounts of paper money to fund wars or construction projects, triggering inflation that eroded trust in the currency. The Yuan dynasty, founded by Mongol conquerors, printed so much paper money that it became nearly worthless, contributing to economic chaos that helped undermine Mongol rule in China. The lesson was clear, but would be repeatedly forgotten. Paper money required restraint and credibility to function. European travelers to China, most famously Marco Polo, were astonished by paper money. Polo wrote detailed descriptions of how the Chinese system worked, explaining to incredulous European audiences that the Chinese yuan could make people accept mere paper as if it were gold or silver. European readers found this almost magical, a testament to the power of the Mongol state and the sophistication of Chinese commerce. Yet Europeans didn't immediately adopt paper money. For centuries, European economies continued to rely on metal coins, with all their attendant limitations. What did develop in medieval and Renaissance Europe were various forms of credit instruments that served similar functions to paper money without being quite the same thing. Bills of exchange emerged as a crucial innovation in European banking. A merchant in Venice who needed to pay a supplier in London could purchase a bill of exchange from a banker. This document, similar to a modern check, promised payment of a specified sum in London. The merchant could send the lightweight bill rather than transporting heavy coins across dangerous roads. The London supplier could present the bill to a corresponding banker and receive payment in local currency. This system facilitated long-distance trade while avoiding the risks and costs of transporting coin. Italian banking families, especially the Medici of Florence, perfected systems of credit and deposit banking that operated across Europe. They maintained branches in major commercial centers and developed techniques for transferring funds between them, using written instruments rather than coin shipments. Their ledgers tracked complex webs of debt and credit, allowing merchants to conduct business without constantly moving metal around. In effect, they created an early form of banking money, entries in account books that could be transferred between parties. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, represented another crucial step toward modern money. It began issuing banknotes that were promises to pay gold or silver on demand. These notes circulated as currency, particularly in London and other commercial centers. Because the Bank of England was a reliable institution backed by the British government, people grew comfortable accepting its notes instead of coin. This represented a shift toward institutional trust as the foundation of money's value, moving away from the intrinsic value of precious metals. The transition to paper money accelerated during the 17th and 18th centuries. Various European governments issued paper currencies, often to finance wars. The results were mixed. Some paper currencies maintained value and public confidence. Others, like the assignats issued during the French Revolution, were printed in such excess that they became worthless, triggering hyperinflation and economic chaos. The pattern was consistent. Paper money could work brilliantly when managed responsibly, but it also created temptations for governments to solve fiscal problems by printing currency, invariably leading to inflation and loss of confidence. Colonial America experimented extensively with paper money. The various colonies issued their own currencies with varying degrees of success. Some colonial currencies maintained reasonable value. Others depreciated so rapidly that they became practically worthless. The phrase, "not worth a continental," referring to the continental currency issued during the American Revolution, reflects how quickly poorly managed paper money could lose all value. The experience left the American founders deeply suspicious of paper money and motivated the constitutional requirement that states use only gold or silver as legal tender. The 19th century saw the gradual spread of central banking and more sophisticated management of paper currency. The Bank of England's pound sterling, backed by substantial gold reserves and carefully managed, became the premier international currency. Other nations developed similar systems, creating paper currencies that were theoretically convertible to gold or silver, but that circulated primarily as paper because institutional trust made conversion unnecessary. The gold standard emerged as an international system linking various national currencies to gold at fixed exchange rates. This provided stability and predictability to international trade. A British merchant knew that pounds, francs, marks, and dollars could all be converted to gold at established rates, making it relatively easy to calculate values across borders. The system worked well during periods of peace and stability, but strained during wars and economic crises when governments faced pressure to print money beyond what their gold reserves could support. Banks themselves evolved to create money through lending. When a bank makes a loan, it doesn't hand over a pile of bills that was sitting in its vault. Instead, it creates a deposit in the borrower's account, essentially conjuring money into existence through bookkeeping entries. This money creation by private banks, operating under central bank regulations, became a crucial feature of modern economies. Most of the money in circulation today exists not as physical currency, but as electronic entries in bank computers, numbers representing claims on future value. Modern money and beyond. The 20th century witnessed the final separation of money from physical commodities and the rise of purely fiat currencies backed only by government authority and public trust. The gold standard, which had provided stability to international finance for decades, collapsed under the pressures of World War I. Warring nations printed money far beyond their gold reserves to finance military operations. After the war, attempts to restore the gold standard failed repeatedly as economic crises and political instability undermined the system. The Great Depression of the 1930s exposed further limitations of gold-backed currency. As banks failed and people hoarded gold, the money supply contracted severely, deepening the economic collapse. Countries that abandoned the gold standard earlier generally recovered faster, because their governments could expand the money supply to fight deflation. The United States officially ended gold convertibility for citizens in 1933, though gold remained important for international settlements. The Bretton Woods system, established after World War II, represented a compromise. The U.S. dollar would be convertible to gold at a fixed rate, and other currencies would maintain fixed exchange rates with the dollar. This made the dollar the world's reserve currency and gave the United States an enormous economic power. But the system contained a fundamental contradiction. As the global economy grew, it needed more dollars in circulation. But creating more dollars eventually meant the U.S. didn't have enough gold to back them all. The Bretton Woods system collapsed in 1971 when President Richard Nixon ended dollar convertibility to gold. Since then, the world has operated on purely fiat currencies backed by nothing except government decree and public trust. This might sound precarious, and yet modern fiat currencies have generally worked well, maintaining value and facilitating enormous economic growth. The key has been institutional credibility and careful management by central banks focused on maintaining price stability. Digital money represents the latest evolution, though its roots go back further than many realize. Electronic banking systems emerged in the 1970s, allowing funds to be transferred between accounts through computer networks rather than physical checks or cash. Credit cards, introduced in the 1950s and 60s, created forms of purchasing power that existed purely as electronic records. By the late 20th century, most money existed primarily as electronic data rather than physical bills and coins. The Internet accelerated the digitization of money. Online banking, electronic payment systems like PayPal, and eventually smartphone-based payment apps made it possible to conduct transactions without any physical exchange of currency. Money became increasingly abstract, just numbers displayed on screens, yet it continued to function as effectively as metal coins or paper bills. This demonstrated something profound. Money is ultimately an information system, a way of tracking who owes what to whom. The physical form, whether gold coins or electronic bits, is secondary to the record-keeping and social trust that makes the system work. Cryptocurrencies represent a further evolution toward abstract digital money. Bitcoin, introduced in 2009, attempted to create a currency backed by neither government authority nor intrinsic commodity value, but by cryptographic proof and a distributed ledger called a blockchain. The innovation was to solve the double spending problem, ensuring that digital currency couldn't be copied infinitely like any other computer file. Bitcoin and subsequent cryptocurrencies remain controversial and volatile. but they demonstrate that money can potentially exist without traditional institutional backing, relying instead on mathematical algorithms and distributed consensus. Central banks are now exploring their own digital currencies, state-issued money that exists purely in electronic form without physical bills or coins. China has been piloting a digital yuan. The European Central Bank is researching a digital euro. These would combine the institutional backing and stability of traditional fiat currency with the efficiency and flexibility of purely digital transactions. They might also provide governments with unprecedented ability to monitor and potentially control economic transactions, raising questions about privacy and state power. The future of money likely involves increasing abstraction and digitization. Physical cash is already declining in many societies as people shift to electronic payments. Some analysts predict a cashless future where all transactions are digital, tracked, and recorded in vast databases. This would offer efficiency and transparency, but also create potential for surveillance and financial exclusion of those without access to digital systems. Yet, for all these technological changes, money continues to serve the same fundamental functions it did when Lydian craftsmen first stamped electrum chunks with lions' heads 26 centuries ago. It remains a medium of exchange, allowing indirect trade and avoiding the double coincidence problem. It serves as a unit of account, providing a standard measure for comparing values. It acts as a store of value, allowing people to save purchasing power for future use. And, perhaps most importantly, it continues to represent trust, the willingness of strangers to accept symbols of value because they believe others will accept those same symbols tomorrow. The deeper meaning. As we drift toward the end of this journey through the history of money, it's worth reflecting on what this story reveals about human nature and civilization itself. Money seems like such a mundane topic, something prosaic and practical, a tool for buying groceries and paying bills. Yet the invention and evolution of money represents something profound about how humans cooperate on massive scales. Money is, fundamentally, a technology of trust. It allows strangers to cooperate without personal relationships or institutional mediators. When you accept a coin or a bill or a digital payment from someone you've never met, you are expressing trust in a system that spans millions of people and potentially centuries of history. You're betting that others will accept this symbol of value in the future, that it will retain purchasing power, that the institutions and social conventions supporting it will persist. This leap of trust enables cooperation on scales that would be impossible through personal relationships alone. The transition from gift economies to monetary economies represents a shift from trust in people to trust in systems. In a small village where everyone knows everyone, you can track who owes what to whom through memory and reputation. Trust is personal and direct. But in a city of thousands or an empire of millions, personal trust can't scale. Money provides a system of anonymous, impersonal trust that works even among strangers. It's a solution to the problem of how to cooperate with people you'll never know personally. This impersonal quality of money has been both celebrated and mourned throughout history. Ancient philosophers worried that monetary exchange degraded genuine human relationships, reducing everything to cold calculation. They weren't entirely wrong. Money does change social relationships, creating possibilities for exploitation and inequality that might not exist in pure gift economies. Someone can accumulate wealth far beyond any personal need. Others can be excluded from prosperity despite contributing valuable labor. The freedom that markets provide can shade into the ruthlessness of pure self-interest. Yet money also liberates people from the constraints of traditional hierarchies. In a pure gift economy, you are bound to your community for survival. You can't easily leave because you'd lose all the social capital you've built through years of reciprocal relationships. Money makes exit possible. You can take your coins and move to a new city where no one knows you, starting fresh with nothing but your portable wealth. This mobility, simultaneously exciting and unsettling, has shaped how modern societies have developed. The history of money also reveals the recurring tension between sound currency and the temptations of inflation. From the Lydians debasing their electrum coins to modern governments running printing presses to finance expenditures, the pattern repeats endlessly. Those with the power to create money face overwhelming incentives to create more of it, especially during crises or wars. Yet excessive money creation destroys the very trust that makes money functional. Finding the balance between flexible money supply and maintained value remains one of the central challenges of economic policy. Money has shaped consciousness itself in ways we rarely recognize. The ability to quantify value, to say this equals that many coins are dollars, changes how we think about the world. It encourages abstract reasoning, mathematical thinking, and complex planning. Some scholars argue that monetized economies contributed to the development of abstract philosophy and mathematical sciences, as humans grew accustomed to manipulating symbolic representations of reality. The invention of money also enabled the accumulation of capital on scales previously impossible. Wealth could be stored indefinitely, concentrated, and deployed for large projects. This capital accumulation funded everything from irrigation systems to merchant fleets to industrial factories. Economic growth accelerated because money made it possible to gather resources from thousands of small savers and direct them toward major investments. The modern world's prosperity rests partially on this ability to pool capital efficiently. Yet, money's greatest trick might be how it disappears into the background of our lives. We use it constantly without thinking about its strangeness. These pieces of paper, these digital numbers, these coins in our pockets, they have no value except what we collectively agree they have. That agreement, maintained across billions of people and spanning the globe, represents one of humanity's most remarkable achievements. It's a shared dream that we've all agreed to dream together, and in dreaming it together, we've made it real. The story of money is ultimately a story about human imagination and cooperation. Someone in ancient Lydia imagined that value could be captured in a stamped piece of metal. Others agreed to accept that imagination as reality. From that initial agreement, built layer upon layer of further innovation and trust, we've constructed the global financial system that underlies modern civilization. Every time you make a purchase or deposit money in a bank or check your account balance, you're participating in a system of social cooperation that stretches back thousands of years and spans the entire world. Money reveals that humans are, at our core, intensely social creatures who have evolved remarkable abilities to create and maintain shared fictions. We can coordinate our behavior around abstract symbols because we trust that others will coordinate their behavior around the same symbols. This capacity for shared belief in things that exist only because we believe in them, it's what allows civilizations to function. Money is perhaps the clearest and most universal example of this peculiarly human ability. As we move into an increasingly digital future, money continues to evolve. Yet the fundamental questions remain the same. How do we create systems of value that people can trust? How do we balance the flexibility needed during crises with the stability required for long-term planning? How do we ensure that monetary systems serve broad prosperity rather than concentrating wealth and power in few hands? These are questions without perfect answers, questions that each generation must address anew. The Lydian craftsmen who struck the first coins couldn't have imagined credit cards or cryptocurrency, or the global financial system their invention would eventually spawn. They were solving an immediate practical problem, finding a better way to trade in a world of increasing complexity and interconnection. That they succeeded so spectacularly, that their basic innovation remains at the heart of modern economies, speaks to the profound insight embedded in those first crude stamped pieces of electrum. They understood something essential about human nature and cooperation, and they created a tool that would help shape the course of civilization. Closing reflection. And so we've traveled through time tonight, from the gift economies of ancient villages to the digital money of the modern world, from the first gold coins of Croesus to the abstraction of cryptocurrency. It's been a journey through human ingenuity, through the practical problems that drove innovation, and through the remarkable capacity of people to trust in shared systems of value. As you drift toward sleep tonight, let yourself feel wonder at the strangeness and familiarity of money, that it shapes so much of the world around you, and yet remains as abstract as a dream. We invented money to solve practical problems, to make trade easier, and cooperation possible on larger scales. But in solving those problems, we created something that transformed human societies in ways its inventors could never have anticipated. If you've enjoyed this quiet exploration of how humans learned to capture value in coins and paper and digital bits, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to Sleepy Answers. Your support helps these gentle journeys into knowledge reach others who seek understanding in peaceful form. There's so much more to explore together, so many quiet mysteries waiting to be unfolded in this calm space where learning meets rest. But for now, let everything settle. Let the story of money, with all its complexities and implications, fade into a warm awareness at the edges of the consciousness. You don't need to hold any of it. You can let it all go. The knowledge remains somewhere in your mind, ready when you need it. But for now, it can rest, just as you can rest. Feel your breath slow and deepen. Feel your body sink comfortably into whatever supports you. The night is here to hold you. Your mind has wandered far tonight through centuries and civilizations. But now it's time to return to this quiet moment, this peaceful darkness, this gentle space between waking and dreams. Everything you need to know about money's invention and evolution It's all safely stored now. You've added to your understanding of the world. You've seen how humans solve problems, how we cooperate, how we build systems of trust that span oceans and generations. That knowledge enriches you, even as it fades into sleep's embrace. So, let your eyes stay closed. Let your thoughts drift free. Let the story we've shared tonight become part of the vast tapestry of things you know, things that shape how you see the world, even if you're not consciously thinking about them. The journey from Lydian electrum to modern cryptocurrency has been long and winding, but it's a journey that reveals something beautiful about human creativity and cooperation. Rest now, sleep well, and know that tomorrow, when you see money in whatever form, you might feel a small echo of understanding, a gentle awareness of the remarkable human achievement it represents. But tonight, just rest, just breathe, just be. Good night.